All right. So it's 7 o'clock on the dot. I'm going to go ahead and get the program started. So welcome to the, I guess, winter vertical practice that we're holding for Greater Cincinnati Grotto. Uh, it being cold outside, we've decided to take things indoors. So you may have seen we did a knots practice back in December. This month we decided to do an optimizing your frog system and focus in on new years and new cows, tails, and Pro-6. And we'll talk through a little bit about what that means, how to size your cow's tails properly, how to optimize your frog system for vertical climbing, and we'll talk about Pro-6 and why we still like to carry around Pro-6, what they're used for, how to tie a Pro-6, and how to hitch a Pro-6 as well. Additionally, just as an offer, I did buy quite a bit of dynamic rope. So I've got some Edelrid. I believe this is Heron Eco Dry. Reading the specs, I felt like this would make a good cow's tail rope. So I do have, I believe, 300 feet of it, 60 meters. It's in metric. And if you do need a new cow's tail, get with me. We can cut you a piece. Same thing with Pro-6. Get with me if you're in the local area, and we'll get you a new set of Pro-6. But with that all said, we'll get to the meat of the actual meeting and talk about cow's tails and Pro-6. So I just cut this piece of rope off of that Edelrid Heron that I was just talking about. This is a 9.8 millimeter dynamic rope, and part of the reason we like dynamic rope in our cow's tails is dynamic rope does have very nice properties when it comes to weather resistance and things like that. A lot of rock climbers are very concerned about abrasion on their ropes. So dynamic rope does tend to have a very nice sheath on it. Additionally, there's some theory that if you were to take a fall, that a dynamic cow's tail may absorb some of that impact. Same thing, similarly, there's some theory that the knots within your cow's tail may also absorb some of that impact. I personally do not have data on that, but it is pretty typical for us to use some form of dynamic rope for it. Generally, we like it to be similar to the way that our static climbing rope is, in the sense that of diameters. So we talk about like 8 mil to like 10 mil sort of diameters for the rope. Additionally, cavers generally use a kern mantle, and kern mantle basically means that there's a sheath and a core. So there's several core strands inside of this rope, and then there's this outer sheath that is basically protecting that and holding it all together. Approximately 70% of the strength of a rope is within that core, and approximately 30% is held in the sheath. And that may just help you with kind of understanding rope in general. So I want to call this about 8 feet, just knowing my arm span, and this is a little bit of shorter than that when I double it up. But I just cut this one, kind of based it off of eyeballing my existing cow's tails, and wanted to see sort of something similar in length. And I'll show you my existing cow's tails. I have not cleaned them since this weekend, so forgive them for being a little bit dirty, as I said it in my living room. But on a typical frog system, we've got a short cow's tail and a long cow's tail. And what you see on my long cow's tail here is I've got my long cow's tail carabiner, which is flipped around right now. Let me fix that. And basically with the long cow's tail and the short cow's tail, the long cow's tail is used with your ascender on a traditional frog system. There's some people who also keep a QAS, which is a quick attachment safety. But the way that my cow's tails are set up, and I'm just giving an example, there's other right ways of doing it. I have a alpine butterfly knot at the base. That's where it would attach directly to my D-ring on my frog system. My short cow's tail is what we like to say is about 41 to 43 centimeters long between the point of the knot, the central knot, and the carabiner. The logic behind this is that the stack up of your descender, ascender, and attachment carabiners should stack up to about that distance. And the logic behind the short cow's tail is actually based on designing a rebelay. When we get into some of the alpine caving techniques with something like rebelays, the rebelay needs to be quote unquote to a standard size. And the way that's done is that we would hang by that short cow's tail in the anchor. And as we lower ourselves into that rebelay area, you would then lock off your descender. And the stack up of the equipment reaches about that length. A good other way to estimate it, especially if you're like very, very short like me, you might cheat it a little bit shorter. So maybe on that 41 centimeter end instead of that 43 centimeter end. But the idea is, for me, I tend to keep it somewhere between my elbow to hand there, and that keeps me in a close distance as well if I'm hanging from a hanging traverse. So I see a lot of people's short cow's tails end up being like very, very long, and that makes passing rebelays very difficult for them. It also makes hanging off of a traverse very difficult for them because they might be a long distance away from the actual rope, and so getting from segment to segment ends up being very difficult. So something to consider is as you tie your cow's tails to keep that short cow's tail within that short 41 to 43 centimeter sort of length there. For my long cow's tail, the way that I've sized mine, and it's hard for me to do this at home because I don't have a rope hanging in my house, but I will put my frog gear on, and what I do is I put the hand ascender onto a hanging rope, and I will sit my weight into the frog system, and at the point that I will know it's too long if I can't touch the cam. Basically, it becomes out of reach. And so after I've sat my whole weight into it, if I can't reach the cam, to me, that means it's a bit out of reach. So what I end up doing is I'll cycle through that where I'll get back off of rope, I'll shorten it again, put it back on the rope and sit into it until I kind of get it to a length where it's long as a long cow's tail, but not too long where I can't reach that cam, the upper cam to like down climb it while I'm staying on the rope. So that's kind of my rule of thumb on how to size that. On that long cow's tail, you can see I've got an ascender. This is a left-handed style of basic ascender. This is made by Edelrid as well. I quite like this. My other ascender that I normally use, also a left. I have an old CMI Jumar looking kind of thing, and part of the reason why I use this one is I have relatively small hands, and so this is about the right size for my hands. I know a lot of people really like those Petzl ascenders, and I think CT makes some really good ones as well. But for me, I found that these worked for my personal body proportions. So that's a little bit about my personal gear. There's lots of right options. Another thing to sort of discuss about the things hanging on my cow's tails. I mentioned both times that I have left descenders. I am not left-handed. I'm actually a right-handed person. So when I write, I use my right hand. But the left-handed ascender actually has a few advantages when you're using your frog system. Part of it is that the way that when you are taking a frog step, it meets the croll. It will basically, the shapes of them will meet together very nicely. Additionally, if I were to somehow break my croll, the croll opens out to the right. And if I were to need to replace my croll, say mid cave, the left-handed ascender opens in the same direction as a croll does. So it can be used in an emergency situation as a replacement for a broken croll. And then what we can do is talk about Prusik later. And you might end up using your Prusik, a very lightweight, easy to carry solution, for your upper ascender. The other thing you'll notice about the way that my cow's tail is set up, I also have a removable foot loop. So my foot loop is put on this tiny little carabiner. This is a lightweight Camp Nano 22. The ratings on it are spine rating of 21 kilonewtons, cross direction 8, and gate open 9. So this is a rated carabiner and just as strong as a lot of our big locking carabiners like this Petzl Oval that I have here. So in an emergency situation, I might be able to use this carabiner as well. But what is nice about having a removable foot loop is that if I do, for instance, a few more technical rigging techniques, such as rigging traverse lines, you might need to have your cow's tail removable to move to different anchors. Or if you kind of end up in a bind, having that foot loop removable and able to move to different parts of the rope. For instance, if you were to have a QAS, you could move this over to that. There's huge advantages to being able to swap this around in places. So I do keep mine as a removable foot loop. And my foot loop's just a piece of Dyneema cord with a little bit of protective tubing on it, but there's lots of other foot loops that are commercially sold as well that you can get. This is just my lightweight option. So with that all sort of said, I lost my cord. Sorry. Here's the cow's tail that we didn't tie yet. And what we can do here is do a little demo on how to tie it. So what we like to do with any sort of knot is we like to have a nice 4-inch-ish sort of tail length. I typically measure 4 inches by, taking the palm of my hand, and approximately that much, like taking a fistful of rope, is a 4-inch tail for me. So that's approximately how much we like to have hanging out at the end of any knot. And what that really lets us do is prevent the knot, the tail from backing back out of the knot. So that is sort of kind of where I want my knot to be. So what I might do on this end is I'm going to start off with a barrel knot. There's lots of right ways to tie your cow's tail. My personal preference is I like a barrel knot at the end because it'll cinch down on the carabiner. So what you can see here is I've got a very dirty barrel knot there. So you can see the little X there, and it's just looped over itself onto that carabiner, but it cinches down because it's a slip knot. And so you can see like my carabiner is very, very tight in there. Other options that exist, you can tie a figure 8 there, and some people prefer a figure 8 because it gives a nice meaty, place to grab onto your cow's tail. So if you had a figure eight there, maybe you can grab that. The only disadvantage there is that it will leave the bite there. So your carabiner might be, slipping around on the inside of that bite. So that's personally why I like my barrel knot. That's, again, personal preference though. I don't tend to grab this knot very often. If I'm grabbing anything, I typically grab my carabiner by its spine, or I'll be grabbing my hand ascender. So I don't really have a need to grab that area, and therefore I don't use the figure eight in that place. Additionally, figure eight uses a little bit more rope. So we'll start with that barrel knot. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make that little loop that we had there that was holding our carabiner. And actually, if I find a carabiner, we can do it right around the carabiner. So again, I have that little bit of a 4-inch tail. I'm going to go a little bit longer just because I need to loop this around my other piece of rope. But what you're going to do is you're going to come around and you make a loop fully around the rope, the standing line, and you cross back over it. I'm going to feed myself a little bit more tail to work with. So we've made our loop. We're going to cross back over. And we're going to cross back one more time. So you can see, whoops, I've basically crossed over my line twice, if that sort of makes sense. And you can see where it's got a little, that X that we were talking about earlier, it's got that crossover right there. And I'm going to take the tail, and go over the end, over the X. And then I'm going to cinch it down with that little 4-inch tail I was talking about. So that's about 4 inches right there. And we've got basically that barrel knot now. I have this big bite here. I can just suck it through on the main line. And you see how it just cinched down on my carabiner there. So that is my barrel knot. I'm going to do it again on the other end so we can demo that one more time. I've got another carabiner. And this is all an approximation. Obviously, we talked about the sizing of the different tails. So the short tail being the 41 to 43 centimeters, the long tail being that test where you hang it on a rope and kind of put your weight into it and can still touch the cam of your ascender. That all would need to be sized personally to your body proportion. But typically what you would do is size it, work it out a little bit of excess onto the tail, and then eventually cut your tails so that they still have that little 4-inch slack in there or tail on it. So we're gonna, again, whoops, drop our carabiner. We've looped our rope through. Here's my tail end. I'm gonna cross over the rope, come around, and loop it through. Whoops. Come around one more time. So you got kind of 2 wraps around it, if that sort of makes sense. In the back, that's kind of what it looks like in the back. Here's what it looks like in the front right now. And basically come back around and cross over that front part there and poke that tail through. Hopefully you guys can see this. Oops. Poking the tail through. Okay. And we're gonna pull that tail till it's about 4 inches right there. And then I'll just cinch this down and tighten it all back up. So that's your basic barrel knot right there. Cool. And so I've got my two ends. You don't necessarily need to do it in this order, but my two ends are now done on my cow's tail there. And we talked about that 43 centimeters. Approximately for me, it's, around here to my elbow. I will basically, I like a butterfly knot in my center. Again, it doesn't have to be a butterfly. You could use a figure 8 there as well. Perfectly safe, perfectly good knot. Part of the reason why I like a butterfly knot though is the alpine butterfly is a tri-loadable knot. What that means is that it can be loaded in 3 different directions. And what is nice about that is it likes to, have its legs kind of pulled outwards. So I'm gonna describe it describe it first, and then we'll practice tying that again. But basically, having this bite be what goes on my D-ring means I can pull it in this direction, and then the cow's tails also can be pulled in the alternate 2 directions. So it's, when we say it's tri-loadable, it can be loaded in 3 different directions. Each of these 2 legs, which are, leading to your 2 cow's tail carabiners, and this central knot, which is going to be on your D-ring, really facing this way actually. So those cow's tails are going up off of your D-ring, which would be in here. So that's personally why I tend to tie a alpine butterfly right there. So we can practice this knot. And the way that I just tied it, there's multiple right ways to tie it. One is that you can, wrap your hand and tie it. But the way that I just did it was that you put 2 twists in your rope. So you can see I've got 2 twists in it. And basically you're going to fold it forward. And then you kind of stick your thumb through the 2 center holes there. And the bite of that knot gets pushed through that center right there. Setting and dressing the butterfly knot, you basically need to pull the 2 ends of it. So 1, 2, and then that center right there. So now my knot is set and dressed right there. So that's the butterfly knot. We can do that one more time. So it's twist, twist. We've got those 2 twists in there. You can see this bite of this knot's going to fold forward. I put my thumb through the center hole right there, through both strands, and then that bite gets pushed through that center hole right there. And then I just set and dress it by pulling my 2 legs and this bite right here. I like to keep this bite very, very small initially, as small as I can get it really, because once you put it onto your D-ring and you've hung off of it a few times, it'll want to stretch a little bit just because of your weight loading it. So I try to keep that small so it doesn't just drag out and then accidentally you have like, a couple inches of slack right there. So looking at that, I think I've sized that pretty good for my short cow's tail. You can see I'm, hand on my spine right there of my carabiner and my elbow there. So that's approximately that 41 to 43 inch right there. I mean, centimeters, sorry, metric and metric system. So that's the butterfly knot right there. Another way to tie it, so we'll go into that as well, is we wrap the hand. So I wrap 3 strands or 3 times around the hand. So 1, 2, 3, there's 3 wraps. What I like to do then is, and there's multiple ways to pick the strands to make this happen, but what I typically do is I take my finger, I put it under the top strand, pick the second middle one, pull it forward, and then pull it over both strands that are wrapped around my hand. And then I just push it through that middle right there. And that also forms a butterfly knot. So you can see the bite there, and then I pull my 2 legs. So we can do that one more time. 1, 2, 3 strands wrapped around my hand. Under the top, pick the middle, over both strands, and then push through the center hole right there. And then I pull my 2 legs to set and dress it. So again, that's another way to tie the butterfly knot. If anybody does want to use a figure 8 there, the other knot that we were talking about, that can be used. Let's see. You would grab a bight of rope. This is weird facing a camera, not instead of facing myself. But basically the way that I tie the figure 8, I like to do it kind of by moving the tails around, because when you move the tails, all of the twisties kind of twist out of the tail instead of twisting into the knot. When you move the bight of the knot around, it tends to, keep the twisties around in the bight. So the way that I've learned to do it to get a very nicely set and dressed knot as an end result is that you get to keep all of your strands parallel. It takes about 10 inches to build the knot. And so kind of that's about how much I've got across my hand right now. But bight facing down across my palm, I make the little finger gun. The strands are parallel around my back of my 2 fingers. You kind of create this little ribbon here. Then fold the bight of the knot across the front, and then poke it through the top from the back of the knot through the back. At this point, we've got a loosely dressed knot. I like to roll my knots because I have small hands, and it is a little bit easier for me to roll my knots. But I rolled it through a little bit, and then you can pull each of the 2 tail ends to tighten it down. But you can see that it is a dressed knot because all of my strands are parallel and nothing's crossing over each other. So that's a set and dressed figure 8. That's another good way to have a central knot. It can also be used for your carabiner knots like we talked about earlier, but just various variations. Does anybody else who's on the line have variations that you in particular like and want to share? All right.
I guess I might have one.
Yeah.
And I have yet to tell anybody why it's not right to do, but I'll have my long cow's tail, but for my short cow's tail, I have an adjustable lanyard on it.
Okay.
As I can't think of anything but benefits to having that.
Yeah, I personally don't, because generally after getting used to my short cow's tail being the right length for my body proportion, I've not needed to use that. But adjustable cow's tails are a way to help yourself out if you get stuck on rope or stuck in a rebelay or something like that. It might give you a little bit of leverage there to get out of it. So cool.
You're right, and I'm sorry, I kind of got in here a little bit late,
Yeah.
but I agree. I think instead of carrying a third cow's tail for doing changeovers or when you find yourself getting into a bit of trouble, instead of just having a short cow's tail, you
Mhm.
can make it adjustable and then you're able to carry less gear.
Okay. Very cool. All right. So that's a little bit about cow's tails. Now what I guess I'll do is we can talk through a few frog gear optimization items. I do have my frog gear set behind me. And so we've talked about the cow's tail itself, the two carabiners that I keep on mine, my hand descender and my foot loop. But we can talk through a little bit about my frog gear system here, I guess. I personally am still using a Gonzo Guano harness. It's very simple, and I've never found a reason to replace it. You know, there's more comfortable harnesses that are out there. I guess I've gotten used to using this, so I've never upgraded myself to a more comfortable harness, but this is what I've got going. So put this on. So when we talk about caving harnesses, they're a little bit different than rock climbing harnesses. Caving harnesses tend to sit low on the body, on the hips. And part of the logic behind this is when you're taking a step in a frog system, the most efficient step is, let me get this fully set up first. The most efficient step in a frog harness is, because we're climbing rope, we do something we call frogging. The most efficient step is from your hip, because my leg is right here. So part of it is efficiency, part of it is also if you had a harness that was much higher up and you were to take a fall on it while on rope, you might hurt yourself up here. So frog harnesses do sit on the hip, caving harnesses sit on the hip. And let me put my chest harness on as well. And we can talk through the different components of the frog system. Sorry, I just unbundled this. Hot mess. Okay, so the components of a frog system, we've got a seat harness, we've got a chest harness. There's this D-ring in the center, and that center malleon really basically holds all of your gear on it. What I like to do is I like to keep the croll on the furthest to the right, and part of the logic for keeping this to the furthest on the right is the croll opens to the right, and anything that is on the right hand side might interfere with that croll being able to open. So I find it very important to keep that device as the item that is on the furthest to the right side. So I know there's some people who have kept it centered in their D-ring. I personally feel like having this kind of free is important to me. What you'll see next on my system is I have a bobbin style descender. So I've got a Petzl stop on right now. What I have found that I really, really like is Petzl sells this little plastic piece called the Captive. And I don't worry about my device accidentally cross-loading anything here on my gate. because I have this little plastic piece that's designed to keep it kind of trapped and not kind of wobble around. So that's kind of one of my favorite low investment cost pieces of gear if you are using a bobbin. Um, Along with my bobbin, I'm also using a Raumer Handy, which is my brake beaner. I have found that after using several different types of brake beaners, including the Petzl Freno, I have settled on this as sort of my favorite. It does have a rounded end and a pinchy end, depending on how much braking you need. But I'm just talking about my particular system right here. This is actually not my primary device. I use this most of the time if I'm rigging something. Personally, that's just my choice. My primary descent device, I'm typically using this micro rack right here. I use a 10-inch micro rack because I really don't weigh enough to use much smaller of a micro rack. 8-inch micro racks do exist, but I have not found much utility in them because gravity is not on my side. And spreading the bars on this is already hard enough, so a smaller micro rack really does not work so well for me. A couple things to note. You'll notice the difference between my attachment devices. So when I use my micro rack, I typically have this malleon. It's a 7mm long malleon on my micro rack. And my logic behind that is racks do have enough leverage on them or length on them that if they torque, if they were to get into the gate of a carabiner, they could potentially torque it open. Chad McCain actually has a really good video on YouTube explaining what that looks like of rolling your rack out of a carabiner. So just something to be aware of, that a good choice for a rack could be a malleon, because these are locked close, and so you don't have to worry about that accidentally opening while you're on your system. But what you'll notice for my bobbin is that I'm using a carabiner. And the difference is that the opening device on a bobbin could actually slip through a malleon, and there have been reported fatalities due to that. So you do want this nice beefy spine here for that bobbin to close over, because a malleon could potentially slip out of that. So something important to kind of know about your connectors. And then finally, I have my cow's tails on the left. And part of why I like that is, again, we talked about having a left-handed ascender. Having the, but because of the fact that I have my Kroll on my right-hand side, and I want nothing to be to the right of it so that I can very clearly open it easily, inherently, that means that my hand ascender has to be somewhere to the left of it. It could be centered, it could be to the furthest left. I keep mine to the furthest left. But by having it on the left, it makes a lot of sense to have a left-handed ascender, because I am not going to have to cross the rope either in the front or the back of the rope in order to put my hand ascender on. If I have my hand ascender on the left, it just slaps onto the rope directly from the left, and I don't have to cross it to come in from the right, if that makes sense. So that's another reason why I like having a left ascender. Additionally, typically my right hand is my brake hand for my descent device. So if I'm, my right hand should not be leaving the rope as I'm descending, because I'm using that as my brake hand. If my right hand is my brake hand and I'm using it to lock things off, it's nice to have my ascender on the left and my left hand free for that kind of thing. So just, 3 really good reasons for having a left ascender, it, touches my kroll very nicely when I'm frogging. And my kroll can be replaced by my left-handed ascender. Even if it's a handled ascender, it fits into the position of the kroll more nicely because it opens in the correct direction. If my kroll were to break, I could use that instead. And then that whole thing about not having to cross the rope and having good rope management with my right hand on the brake strand are all sort of my reasons for why I personally like a left ascender better. Just keeps me a lot tidier. Couple of other things about frog gear sizing. So we talked about sizing our cow's tails. But one thing that I also noticed that a lot of people end up with, and then they struggle during their changeovers, is they often have their their foot loops a little too long. Sort of the optimum foot loop length is if you were to put your foot in the foot loop. You can see that the maximum step I can make is my knee sort of at my hip, and then my leg completely straightened. So my maximum step being from a bent knee to a fully straightened leg means that my longest foot loop length should really be at a place where I have that straight leg. So the way that I size it is I put my foot in the foot loop and then I basically step down. And at the point where my hand ascender is touching my kroll, that's about the maximum step that I'm going to get out of my system. And so if I have my foot loop exactly that length where they meet like that, that's my maximum physical step that I can possibly take. Any longer than that, and we start to get an inefficient system because my leg loop is too long. And basically, I'm not stepping fully into it and getting a full step out of it. So if it's too long, you're going to expend a lot of extra energy sort of fighting your own system. So it'll make your changeovers a lot easier if you get a full step out of it. And it'll make your rebelays a lot easier as well if your foot loops are the right length. So something to really think about is shortening your foot loop until it's the right length where your hand ascender and your kroll kind of touch when you're stepping a full step. So any longer than that, you end up just with a very inefficient system. And then just one thing to note is, you do have a chest harness. The chest harness is not technically rated for you to invert or anything like that in it. This really exists in order to hold the kroll up in an upright position. One trick that I was explained is that due to the shape of the kroll and the twist that's in the kroll will lay flatter on your chest if you lay the chest harness strand front to back. So you can see mine feeds in from the front going to the back. There's nothing wrong technically about feeding it back to front, but you see how it kind of twists everything and wants to like go into my belly there, and like you're not going to get a really efficient rope being flat through it if you do it back to front like that. So again, it's just one of those things that's just inefficient, and it's really going to make you fight yourself a lot. But it's just due to the metal shaping of how it's turned on the kroll. If you feed it from front to back, it'll lay nice and flat, and you'll have a better time with that rope going straight through the kroll. So those are a couple little tricks on the frog system right there. Does anybody else sort of have any thoughts or questions or optimization items that they have on their system that they want to share? Okay. I guess one other piece of gear that I can kind of show you guys that I do have laying around. I do own a full-size rack. So in terms of choices of descent devices, this is my full-size rack, and I have overthought this thing. This is like, you totally do not need to have it as overthought as mine is. But for longer descents, call it like 200, 300 plus 400 more, whatever, sort of foot descents, you might want a full rack. And a full rack is really great for adding friction or really the control that you get because of it. Yeah, we got a question in the chat. If I could repeat my reasons for using a left ascender. So my reasons for a left ascender is when I take a frog step, the way that it touches the curl, they basically mate the rope up in an offset position like this, instead of if it was a right ascender, you would have been offset with a twist. So it holds the rope very straight when you left a left to a crawl, which is also technically opens to the right, but the same direction as a crawl. So the nice thing is that also if I were to break my crawl partway through my cave trip, say this thing is completely destroyed, I can't use it anymore. Even if my left ascender had a handle on it, like if it was this guy, for example, I could still put it, I could take the crawl off and put this on instead, and it opens in the same direction and operates similarly to how your crawl would work. So it's sort of my backup device in that regard if I were to have broken my crawl. And then if I were to be climbing rope, so say this was the rope I was climbing, right? And I had it in my crawl. So it's in my crawl right now. If I have a left-handed ascender, it comes from the left because everything is clear of my crawl. I don't keep anything on the right-hand side because my crawl needs to open on the right-hand side. So inherently, my cow's tail is on the left if my crawl is on the right. So if this is on the left, it comes from the left onto my rope, which means I never have to cross my rope. So I can put it on very easily like that. Whereas if it was a right-handed ascender, you would be approaching it. It would have to enter the device from the right-hand side, which means I have to cross the rope at some point in order to put my ascender on. When I cross the rope, my gear maintenance now gets really complicated, and this is very, very easy to like accidentally do one of these where it's like crossed from the inside, and now you've got this weird friction of your cow's tail rubbing against the rope. So personally, I have found that I have better gear maintenance if I have a left ascender because it's coming from the left right onto the rope. Additionally, when I've rigged my descent device, and I'm descending on it, basically like my descent device should always be getting braked with my right hand. So my right hand is my brake hand. And basically I'm going to yank on this. If I'm descending too fast, I always, brake strand on my right. If my right hand is technically not supposed to like leave the rope because it's my brake hand, it just makes a lot of sense that my left hand manages any ascenders because my right hand is supposed to be on that rope as my brake strand. So if that kind of made sense, feel free to ask any other questions as well. But that's my logic for why I like a lefty. So back to talking about big rack. For big descents and for a lot of control, right? So like a micro rack, you never drop bars because it's got only 4 bars. If you go less than that, you end up um, uh, going to too few points of friction. The full rack has 6 bars on it. You can drop up to 2 bars. So basically bar 6 and bar 5 are optional. But basically I would never drop less than 4 bars. That gives you sufficient friction on this. What is important is when using a rack, the friction points, you're really just spreading the bars to adjust how much friction you've got on the rope. So like I was saying earlier, my rack is very, very much overthought. You do not have to have all the bells and whistles, but I will talk you through my logic of why I built my rack the way that I did. I sort of custom did mine. And part of it is I'm a little bit smaller and going for a ride on a full rack, I sometimes have a little too much friction for me, especially at the top of the rope. I don't weigh enough to kind of like yank it all down for me. So I do have a rounded bar at the top with a hyper bar. That does help me that if towards the end of the drop, I need a little more friction, I can yank my rope up and pull it over that and give me like a soft lock, for example, or I might be able to use that as a 7th bar almost, because I did put a rounded bar on the bottom for myself. You cannot technically use a hyper bar if you are for moving rope if you have U-shaped bars. U-shaped bars are better at cooling, but because it has this sharp edge here, you're technically not supposed to use your rope riding over a hyper bar while using a U-shaped bar. So U-shaped bars are because of cooling, but this sharp edge makes it so you can't ride a hyper bar. So what I do have is I've got a hyper bar. I've got 2 spacers on mine, and that's again because I've got smaller hands. It's hard for me to kind of yank all my bars down initially. So this just makes sure that I have this gap right here for that rope to feed through. You can see from the back of my rack, I do have this thick cooling bar with a groove in it for my 2nd bar. And so that's simply because this bar always stays on, and I do want a thick cooling bar, and this like training groove almost helps me make sure that my rope is centered as I'm using that. So kind of, again, bells and whistles, not 100% necessary, but things that help me as a smaller person here. My 3rd and 4th bar are U-shaped bars because they're better for cooling. These 2 bars always stay on as well. And then my bottom 2 bars I have as rounded bars because if I do get into a situation where I do want to go over the hyper bar, that allows me to do that. So that is my personal design for a full-size rack. I talked about earlier how the micro rack can also like torque through a carabiner. My solution for my rack is that I have, again, a Mallion. It's a removable sort of attachment point, but it is a lockable one where I'm not so concerned about it cross-loading a gate and then accidentally rolling out. I did have a straight eye rack. Racks were originally designed in the tag area to be straight-eyed, and the reason why they were straight-eyed was because they would go directly on the D-ring and you would operate your rope left to right. If you kind of think about it, if my rack was facing me like this, my braking area for such a long device is very, very small because as I'm descending, my brake goes out or my brake comes in. And basically, if it's in weighted position, I have no braking distance between the rack and my chest here. So racks were straight eye because they were initially designed to be directly on the D-ring, and you would brake left and right, which gives you more distance with that rope. Since the initiation of the rack, there have been incidents where people kind of got stuck on rope, or their rack needed to come off the rope for some reason. So from a rescue standpoint, it is nice to have a detachable device. And so in order to continue to have my rack in that left and right braking position, I do have a 90-degree twisted malleon on my full rack, because it allows for me to have a removable rack, so it's not directly tied into my D-ring. But because it's got that twist in it, it's allowing me to have that left-right braking instead of that getting it jammed in my chest, can't brake kind of situation where a straight malleon would orient it weird. So just something to think about, why the full rack was designed the way that it is, and why you want to be able to brake left and right instead of, into your face. Having that twisted malleon really has been a benefit for me. So cool. So that's a little bit about full rack, different descent devices. What else do I want to talk about? So we talked about what if I broke my Kroll, right? And if I broke my Kroll and I want to replace it with my hand descender, one of the good ways to replace my hand descender, which I'm now using as my Kroll, is to use a Prusik. And so a Prusik loop is a very, very easy way, easy, cheap thing to carry around, really. And again, I bought a whole bunch of cord. So if you're in the local area and you see me around and you're like, hey, I just want some Prusik cord, like, let me know. I'll cut you some Prusik cord. I've got plenty of it now. So here's two of my Prusiks. I'm typically using 6mm cord, dynamic as well, for my Prusiks. Somebody asked me at one point, what about Dyneema? Dyneema's super strong. It seems like it would be a really good material for Prusiks. Dyneema is actually a really horrible material for Prusiks. It's great for anchoring. It's super, super strong, but for the purpose of Prusiks, the type of plastic that Dyneema is made out of has a very, very low melting point. And the whole point of a Prusik is that it's a hitch and it's providing friction against the rope. And that friction generates heat. And if you read the specs for Dyneema cord, they will actually tell you to not use it for Prusiks because of that low melting point. Basically, that friction on the rope would melt the Dyneema, and that would be a big problem, obviously. So do not use Dyneema. A good dynamic cord is preferable. I've been using 6mm because I find that this is the most efficient climb that I can make on it. And I have found that thicker diameters have not worked for me for climbing. The general rule for a Prusik loop is that the minimum gripping is that you take 3mm off of the diameter of the rope. So if you had 10mm rope, for example, and we subtracted 3mm off of that, that would say 7mm cord would be the size that would work for climbing that 10mm rope. Smaller diameters will still work, but the maximum size of Prusik cord that you could use on a 10mm rope would be a 7mm cord. So this is a 6mm cord. I've got a Prusik knot basically tied into it, which is 2 barrels. And we talked about the barrel knots earlier. Let me grab a piece of cord and we can tie it again. So we've got some 6 mil dynamic cord here. And this one's got the, let's see if I can take the sticker off. That might be annoying. But basically all I'm gonna do is tie that barrel knot again. So we're gonna take big ol' end of rope here. We create an X, or we go around the rope first, create an X, and come back around, and then punch it through. One more pass and punch it through. Whoops. One around. And through. So you can see the barrel knot there. That makes sense. And then basically we want to do that on the other side. And so we go around and cross it, around one more time. And that sticker is being annoying, sorry guys. But basically you punch it through. And what you can see here is that you want the 2 knots to face the same direction. So you see both X's are leaning that direction. If you had one X leaning this way and the other X leaning that way, and they're just not nesting, you just want to take one of them apart and tie it starting in the other direction, looping around, so that they do face, lean the same way, and they're nested that way. That makes it super strong when they're nested like that. And basically, all that this knot is doing is it's helping you close that loop. So you basically get a loop of cord. So that's all that the prusik really is. Now, I don't have anybody here to hold my rope in tension, but hopefully, here, put my full rack as a weight onto the other end, and that should hold it for me. So basically, I've got this piece of rope here. When I take a prusik, to tie a prusik hitch, basically all I'm doing is I like to lay it over the rope, lay the loop over the rope like that. I grab the knot of the prusik, and I actually like to keep it centered when I first do this because it gives me something to kind of grab onto. But basically all you do is hitch it around 3 times. 1, 2, I'm just looping it around, and then 3 around the rope. And you see how I've done that 3 times. And I'm going to dress it up a little bit so that everything gets nice and close, and the strands are not crossed. And basically at this point, because I have this big old knot in the center, what I want to do is I want to offset it. And the best way for me to offset it is I roll one side down towards the other. And this guarantees me an offset. So the way that I like to do it is to keep it centered at first and then offset it at the last minute, where I basically just roll one side of the prusik hitch down to the other. And so that allows me a very clear, easy clipping point for my carabiner. If, for instance, my cow's tail were to need to clip into it. I do have my cow's tails on right now, so I can actually show you that. So if I needed to clip into it as a attachment point, I could clip into it very easily there, where that knot is no longer centered and is not getting in my way. So that's how I like to offset that knot, is start with it centered and then just roll one end down to the other, and it gets that out of the way for me. So the nice thing about the prusik hitch is, as you can see, it's holding me right now. Actually, it's not going anywhere. And if I yank up on this rope, you see it's like deforming the rope even, because it's gripping. So what this does is this hitch What you can see here, it's got this nice bridge here, and every one of those three loop strands is kind of lined up nicely. But basically, when you yank it one direction or the other, it grips onto the rope. But if I were to open the prusik, and by opening the prusik, I mean you grab the hitch, and that'll loosen the strands enough that you can slide it up and down. So basically, you could descend on it if it's open, but it does not want to descend if you just yank on the hitch end like this. So this now works as an ascender. So if I, for instance, were to take my hand ascender and say that I've now broken this, or I'm using it as my kroll or whatever, I've gotten rid of that hand ascender. If I were to clip my cow's tail and my foot loop into that instead, I can now open the prusik by grabbing the prusik hitch itself, slide it up. So now it's slid up, and it's now holding my weight. So it works the same way as an ascender, but it's like this cheap little piece of cord that I can carry around like that. And so you can see it doesn't want to go anywhere until I open it by grabbing it, and then I can slide it up, or I can slide it down if I wanted to. So that's the prusik hitch and why we like that. Nice piece of little cord that you can carry. It doesn't weigh anything for the most part. It doesn't, take up any space for the most part. So that's kind of nice. Somebody showed me this cool trick, and I'm going to mess it up here, on how to take a prusik cord off of a rope. But you find the bridge and find the widest part of the bridge, and if you yank apart on it, really cool, you can like get it to like unbind itself on its own. So like that's just a fun little, I don't know, shortcut trick, is you grab those two bridge ends and just yank apart on it. It makes you look really cool as it flips itself off. So those are prusiks that you can tie. The other thing you might be able to do is if you wanted to buy a sewn prusik, there are prusiks that you can just buy. This is a sterling hollow block. And what's nice about this is that I don't have to tie that end knot there. It's got a sewn version of it here. And this is a 6.8 mil hollow block. The reason it's called a hollow block is it's all sheath, no core. It's got an empty, it's like hollow on the inside, no core in there. And you basically put it onto your rope the same way that your, let's see if I can pin that end again. Put it onto your rope the same way that you would put your prusik on. So I again lay it over the top. I've got my hand on that sewn area because that's kind of the annoying knot situation going on. Wrap it 3 times around the rope. 1, 2, 3. Whoops, come on. Slide down. And then I offset it again by rolling one end down. And then I'm going to want to dress that. But what's nice about the fact that this guy is hollow is that it'll grip really, really nice because it'll deform to the shape of the rope. And so like, again, it'll do the same thing as a prusik where it doesn't want to go up or down until I kind of unlock it by grabbing that and sliding it. So what again, why it's hollow is that it will flatten itself down on that rope and adds a lot more friction on it. So these things are, again, don't weigh much, don't hardly take up any space, but they're a nice little safety item to have. So just wanted to introduce the concept of prusiks and tying them and sizing your cow's tail on today's session, and a few items about optimizing your frog. So hopefully we've met that objective. If anybody has any questions or wants to add anything, feel free to ask or share. All right. Well, if there's no other questions or anything that anybody wants to share, that's all we had for today's session. Thanks for joining with Greater Cincinnati Grotto's monthly technical topics. We'll see you again soon. Oh, next month we've got Laura Demarest speaking to us about the psychology of being on the wrong side of a rescue when caving isn't fun. So I hope you guys join in for that one. It should be a really good talk. She's been on the wrong side of a rescue herself a few times, and she's got a lot of personal knowledge about that. So thanks for joining. Let us know if you have any other cool topics that you want us to try to cover in the upcoming months.